just a quick reminder around curiosity. And this probably will begin to kind of coalesce a little bit in another video yet. The broad engagement of curiosity, the broads, the regularity of curiosity seems to lend itself to acute experience. And in acute experience, we begin to explore something more akin to courage, which we eventually find is the same thing. It's an aspect of authenticity. It's an aspect of truest nature. This particular video, we're going to talk a little bit about the necessity of maybe, the engagement with these conclusions, with what seems certain, and just applying the maybe. And what that helps do is it helps to show some of the light between the cracks. And that's really our point of engagement. Anytime we can see some further truth in our engagement, and anytime we can see the light between the cracks, that helps us engage further on a deeper level. So we could say in some way that maybe is what opens the aperture. The narrow experience of a conclusion is kind of how our aperture tends to close, like this. It engages itself in a tunnel-like way. It begins to essentially block out the rest of the experience, and it is inherently what creates a sense of separation, that hyperfocus. The certainty, the death of curiosity, the graveyard of curiosity lives in the conclusions and in the certainty. So here is just a reminder that you can always use maybe in your experience, and it's highly recommended. And not to just take it on as a superficial mantra, but more to take on maybe as a point of engagement so that you are willing to open the aperture even further. When something seems to occur and there seems to be some sort of certainty around what's occurring, if we apply a maybe, then what happens is curiosity naturally takes over and we find ourselves in that broad engagement. And really, there are two very, very distinct aspects of true nature here that seem to take place in the transition from the broads, the wider engagement of curiosity, eventually moves into a more acute investigation that we could even call courage. And of course, there's still some curiosity in that as well. And then what we eventually find is that they are inherently the same thing. Truest nature is truest nature. Authenticity is authenticity. And even if they do seem to have different points of contact, they are inherently the same. Yet the flavor on the way in, we could say, or the experience or the form or the color, however you want to look at that, does seem to take a little bit of a different tone. And so just being aware of how that tone arises and having maybe just a suspicion or a curiosity that it is inherently the same direction, that will actually help quite a bit in the engagement of this. So let's just use our maybe as a point of engagement. Anytime something seems certain in our lives, we can just add some maybe to that, and that will invite a little bit more curiosity. And then we might start to find certain soothing mechanisms and certain other things showing up that seem to be consistent, that seem to be acute. And if we find those things that show up on a regular basis, or a sense of continuity in these things, or a patterned experience, that's when it seems like we take a more narrow engagement into something that feels more like courage. Because when it does have an acute aspect, then we tend to find a sense of discomfort in that seems to be pretty ubiquitous along the path. If it has a sense of discomfort or pain or some sort of detestable nature to it on a consistent basis, then it is essentially being used as a way to move us away from our experiences and ultimately ourselves. And it's this strange hall of mirrors, but as we move away from our authenticity, as we move away from ourselves, we also begin to perceive everything in a space of separation, we could say. So let the maybe be the opening of the aperture. And then in a future video, we can cover more the aspects of courage and the acute approach, the penetration in the deeper aspects of moving into, we could say, acute sensation, acute patterning, and acute experiences to just see if there's something that is still being obscured from our experience on a regular basis. how's the maybe opening your aperture? Really curious about that. So as always, please leave some questions and comments, and we'll go ahead and approach those. Thank you.